This program is brought to you by Grand Valley State University.
Well, today we're going to be talking about self-leadership, which is sort of an interesting concept. I think we tend to use the word leadership so often that it gets muddled and no one knows what it means, or sometimes it's used just to draw people in, and that's not what we're trying to do. When I say self-leadership, the justification for using that word is that we're preparing ourselves to be leaders in the future, even as we're becoming leaders now. The title for today is Strenuous Life Leadership. Does anyone know where that comes from? Strenuous Life? The Strenuous Life, a Strenuous Life? Roosevelt? Scott's got it. Roosevelt. We need to get the rest of you at more of our programs. Theodore Roosevelt gave a speech in 1899 when he was Vice President of the United States, in which he said, "I want to preach to you not the doctrine of ignoble ease, but the doctrine of a strenuous life, the life of toil and effort, labor and strife." That was his message to those Chicagoans. And it's something he learned through experience. In that speech, he also said that in this life, we get nothing save by effort. Now, if you know anything about Theodore Roosevelt, or if you've read the great biography by Edmund Morris, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, you'll know that he got to his station in life through a very dedicated effort, through much strain, and that's where he got that insight from. It wasn't something he just came up with for the speech. It was a reflection of his life experience. Theodore Roosevelt, as a boy, was very sickly. He was so skinny that he couldn't breathe. He had very bad asthma. It had to be dealt with virtually every day. His father had to get him out and ride him through the hills to try to get him up into higher altitudes so he could breathe. And it was a real problem. And at the same time, he was getting a first-rate education, so he was developing this great brain power, but he didn't have the body to keep up with it. There was even fear that he might not survive or ever be able to thrive as a human being because he just didn't have the strength. And so there was this defining moment in Roosevelt's life where his father said to him, "Son, you have the mind, but you don't have the body. You have to build the body." And so this is where the insight came from. Starting the next day, Theodore Roosevelt worked out this very rigorous exercise program that he was going to go through. And literally for the rest of his life, he exercised hard, even in the White House. And he did. He built the body. He was literally a bodybuilder for the rest of his life. In the White House, he was famous for literally boxing staffers and was blind in one eye from getting hit by one of the staffers. I don't know about you guys, but I'd be a little comfortable if my boss called me to the office and wanted to wrestle or box. That's what he did. Now, since this is a workshop and I want you guys to get involved and feel free to bring in examples or bring in questions whenever you have a chance, I want to start by asking, does anyone have other examples of this? Either in your personal lives, people you know, or in history, people who have really had a dedicated effort to building themselves. Whether it's physically, intellectually, morally, because it's something that we consider to be part of the American experience or the American identity, this idea that we can build ourselves. You guys have any examples of that? I'm going to provide a few others if you don't.
I remember reading something, I think in the Washington Post, about our previous president's exercise regimen each morning. He'd do a lot of mountain biking or running, and was really active even before daylight. So that was kind of interesting how he'd make time, like an hour a day, for 40 minutes to really get endorphins going before.
Roosevelt you're talking about, or just others in general?
I'm talking about George W. Bush.
Oh, George W., yeah. A lot of them do that. They're following sort of the Roosevelt model. He would walk for miles every day and go hiking in the mountains while he was in the White House. And he also read books. He was always trying to improve his mind. He would read books between meetings as president. He would literally read 1 or 2 books a day, every day as president, to try to improve his mind. Scott, what about you?
I just recently saw a thing on public TV about the establishment of the national park system, and I think John Muir and his hikes to the wilderness in California wilderness were for that very purpose. He wanted to be physically fit. And he obviously was very intelligent too.
Okay. So constant self-improvement, self-growth. That's an interesting example. I don't know a lot about Jonathan Muir except for his connection to TR later. Okay, well I want to...
Joe Biden overcame a state like stuttering earlier in life. I mean, not that he's known for his his great speeches or anything now.
We're always saying the right thing.
But no, we're always saying the right thing. But you know, he wouldn't be vice president now if he still had a stutter. I guess he probably wouldn't have even been, senator from Delaware for how many terms?
Right. So it's something he had to master himself.
He'd practice for hours and nights.
Wow. Okay.
There are a number of examples in the athletic world of people that really would fall into the category of those that demanded great things of themselves physically and challenged themselves intellectually. But I think Vince Lombardi in his life regimen and how dedicated he was to both as well. Reading, that he fancied himself as a history buff, and obviously the physical part of who he was and what he did his entire life. But even someone like John Gruden, who there were stories about more recently, who would sleep in his office, and kind of to the extreme as far as the work level. But the notion was that he could go 2 days without any sleep in order to work through, and he did that because he was physically fit.
Wow. Well, that's a strenuous life. Spend all that time. I think common to all these people is an insight that we have endless potential as individuals, but it's something that has to be developed. I think the athletics world is the best example of that, of people who have, at the high school level, can get by just purely on talent, but they realize in college, and if they end up lucky enough to get to the pros, that they have to develop those talents and make a determined effort to do it. Well, I want to assure you, first of all, I started off by saying that this is part of the American experience and the American identity, this idea that we can build ourselves into better people or better form our own potential. But I assure you that this is something that has ancient roots. It's nothing new. And so two people I want to talk to you about today are Confucius, and people in my generation probably have sort of a backwards understanding of Confucius because remember all these dirty jokes growing up with Confucius and this idea that he was this guy who had these pointless rhymes that he put together. But if you really study him closely, you begin to understand that he is someone who really shaped Chinese history for centuries. And when you combine his ideas with Taoism and legalism, it still shapes that country. So he's an extraordinarily important individual. But Confucius is someone I want to talk about briefly, and then Aristotle is the other person. So we're going to look at the East and the West here. And what I want to do is have you guys participate in the reading and the analysis of a few quotations I have here. And so I need a volunteer, first of all, to read this Confucius quotation I've got here. It's out of The Great Learning, which is one of the 5 books of Confucianism. So I have a volunteer here. Someone to play the role of Confucius, Sharon.
The ancients who wished to illustrate illustrious virtue throughout the kingdom first ordered well their own states. Wishing to order well their states, they first regulated their families. Wishing to regulate their families, they first cultivated their persons. Wishing to cultivate their persons, they first rectified their hearts. Wishing to rectify their hearts, they first sought to be sincere in their thoughts. Wishing to be sincere in their thoughts, they first extended to the utmost their knowledge. Such extension of knowledge lay in the investigation of things.
First of all, have you guys come across this quotation before? Or have you read any of the Analects or the Great Learning? Okay. Sometimes it's missing from our K-12 and college education. Well, what do you guys get from that? What are the lessons? What is he trying to say here?
I think you have to excel in the small things before you excel in the large.
Scott, that's one you guys probably encounter a lot in the athletics world, working on the fundamentals.
Absolutely.
What else?
To be honest with others, you first must be honest with yourself.
That sounds like self-knowledge to me, too. Know thyself. What else? Why this hierarchy? Why does he start off at the kingdom or the nation and come all the way down to the individual. That's the point.
Because people aspire to, reach that level, but people tend to skip certain steps before, they aim high, but they don't really follow the steps in order to get there.
Okay, so there's a order and a progression we sometimes skip. But what about for those of us who want to lead something big? What is the implication of what's being said here?
Well, it was going back to the same idea I think we have in the United States very often, the idea that everyone can get to be somewhere further if they start with small steps and move up. And so I think it's that same concept of everyone's not ever going to be the leader of the kingdom, but everyone can be a leader in this one area and then keep progressing.
Right. So lead at all levels. Very good.
I'm struck by the last part of the passage, last sentence, such extension of knowledge, land, and investigation of things. It's a very constructivist approach, where it's obviously that it's not just in listening and reading, but finding knowledge because you go out and seek it. Is what I think that says.
So going out, it's this idea of proactivity. For any of you who've read Stephen Covey, I'll get one in here at least. Proactivity. So go out and find the knowledge. Okay. But what about this criticism we often get of, I think this is a criticism of our generation, or my generation and yours, depending on your age, but is that we get out of college and expect to be leaders immediately, expect to be on top. And sometimes we don't realize that we need to have value before we can do that. And so I guess part of what I'm trying to get at, and I think part of what Confucius was getting at, is that we have to first be able to lead ourselves. So I think all of what you're saying here is true. Excel in the small things, focus on fundamentals, know yourself, be attentive to order and progression, lead at all levels, be proactive in seeking knowledge. But I think the first principle is that if we do want to someday illustrate illustrious virtue, is the words he uses, throughout the kingdom, we have to first focus on developing ourselves as individuals, as human beings. And I want to point out just real quick before we move on, this idea of illustrating illustrious virtue. Something that was very highly valued in Confucianism was to reduce the number of laws and focus on being moral exemplars, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But being a virtuous person yourself and leading in that way. Okay, well, does anyone else have other thoughts on this quotation before we move on?
It just kind of reminds me of like the Sermon on the Mount, where Christ is trying to get back to what's in your heart is really at the base of your actions, and yeah, he's kind of saying the same kinds of things about you have to change your heart and your thought life before you can really affect, your actions.
Right, to change your inner life. It's an interesting idea. I think it's trying to combat the possibility that will demand something but not live up to it ourselves. And so it's saying focus on yourself, then focus on your family, then focus outward further and further. But we have to be good at our cores to begin with. Okay, well, can I get another volunteer to do the same thing with the Nicomachean Ethics? Or it's a distillation of some lessons from Book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics. So that second quotation there, if I get a volunteer. Someone with a good reading voice. Sure. Scott.
Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habits. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny.
Now, what are some general reactions? Because when I hear this, Believes uses this quotation quite a bit. When I hear this, I feel like I'm going to be stumbling through life because I'm being so attentive to every little thing and I don't want to make a mistake or have a slip up. But what do you guys make of this? And does it relate to what we were just talking about? Andy, I haven't heard from you yet. You look like you're being very thoughtful up there.
Well, it's the whole thing of consider what you're doing today and how does that work in accordance to how your life maybe becomes normal. Is the action I'm taking today something I want to be a part of to reach that goal or that person that I want to be? And if not, why am I doing it?
So thinking long term, thinking about the fact that your ideas or your actions have consequences that are longer lasting, is that it?
It's a quote of ours that I think would be in mind.
What else?
But kind of getting back to what you're saying about, well, I have to pay attention to all these details. Kind of what it comes down to is if you watch your thoughts, like that's kind of the root, and then those become your words. So you don't have to necessarily watch your words if you're watching your thoughts, and then it kind of progresses.
Right, right. And what does this imply for self-development? For growing?
Yeah, that the thoughts are at the basis of it. And it definitely demonstrates the connection between these different things, like especially things that habits to character is an interesting connection.
And that's really the core of the Nicomachean Ethics, this whole idea that your thoughts lead to actions, which lead to character. And you sort of stop short of the rest of it that was added for effect by this in this quotation.
I'm struck, if you don't mind me interrupting,
Sure.
I'm struck because I've always thought that the character was displayed in your actions, words, and habits, and not the other way around. I guess this is a different way of thinking for me, in that what I say and what I do and my habits are what build my character. I think I've always thought of it as my character is reflected in those things, and what I say, what I do, and you know, my thoughts are as pure as my character would be.
Right. So it's not, it sounds like your interpretation is that this is a more empowering idea or a more empowering paradigm. This actually can go back to proactivity. There's something called the social cognitive theory, which is really kind of conflated way of saying that we can actually process our environment. What separates us from the wolves or from the rest of the animals is that we don't just react to external stimuli. We just aren't who we are automatically. There's a process and it's a decision. And so we can choose to act differently and shape our character that way. Does that make sense? So what you're saying is you've always thought of it as character being an outward presentation of your actions, or your actions being an outward presentation of your character, but it's actually flipped here, where we're saying you build your character.
Yeah, I don't know that those two ways of thinking are mutually exclusive necessarily, but it certainly is a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. Good. Well, my whole point of doing this was, first of all, to take TR back to ancient history, because this is an ancient insight that we can improve ourselves, and that is fundamental, that we shape ourselves. And in fact, both Aristotle and Confucius were very much focused on developing a leadership class, developing people who were, I guess, worthy of high station in society. And to be that, they first had to develop themselves. Both of them shared this in common. There's a lot of debate about how much we can combine Aristotle and Confucius. Believe it or not, this is an area of considerable scholarship trying to put the two together, even though they were different centuries and different cultures entirely. But both of them had this insight that we can cultivate ourselves by acting in accordance with certain virtues. What is a virtue? Because this is key for both of them, that if we're going to focus on ourselves before we focus on the kingdom, if we're going to focus on our thoughts before we focus on our destiny or ultimate arrival, we need to cultivate certain virtues. What does that mean? What is a virtue? I've either got you guys thinking so hard and you're going so deep that it's amazing where I've just bored you to death. I'm not sure what's going on here. What is a virtue to you guys?
Possibly a rule or principle to live by.
Rule to live by. Why do we live by them?
It's the guy that helps us through the situations to make right decisions, help make moral decisions.
See, I always thought those were more values. When I think of virtues, I think more of kindness, patience, understanding, goodness, that kind of thing, as opposed to a rule to live by.
So good qualities, moral qualities. So one word qualities. Is everyone satisfied with that? The idea that a virtue is a quality that's to be achieved, a quality that we want, something that's good or moral.
Yes.
Okay, Heather's answered it. Good. No, I think that is a great definition, that a quality that is considered morally good or desirable in a person is what we're talking about when we talk about a virtue. And those virtues that we aim at have changed through history. They're different in different cultures, and that's not to say that we're going to go totally over to moral relativism, but there is this sense that different cultures in different times have had different sets of virtues that they live by.
Brian, wouldn't it also be fair to say that, to a certain degree, that each of us defines what's moral and what's virtuous for ourselves? I mean, I guess I hesitate to think that there is a, relative to the time period we live in or the culture that we are part of here or wherever, that there's a universal set of virtues and morals. I mean, I think there are some that are universal, but I think to a certain degree, don't we decide that for ourselves?
What do you guys think? Heather's sort of shaking her head.
Well, with the caveat that there are some that are universal, I think maybe some of them get expressed differently. I think there's probably a basic set that can be demonstrated in all the major cultures of the world. And I think they're not arbitrary. Like, I think the purpose of there's a reason why they're valued. And I think in general maybe it's because they're constructive rather than destructive. Whether that be to yourself or to other people, or, you know what I mean? Like, there's a purpose for it. It's not arbitrary.
What do you guys think about this, how it's taught at a university? Probably should bring this up, but Austin and I were just at a conference on the pursuit of truth.
As I said, are virtues and morals taught at universities?
Yes.
I like it.
Yes.
No.
Ethics and ethics. I've learned lots about it in most of my classes. It's how it's covered. I think with morals, there are some sets, but some are different. Like you said, some we do decide for ourselves, but like it's morally wrong to kill in most societies around the world. And patience, because when I think of virtues, my mom always said patience is a virtue, and that's good for a society. So that's usually practiced.
Okay. Well, this could become a real controversy if we're talking about if we're teaching virtues and morals at university, and if so, which ones should be taught. And we're not going to go down that path because we're focused on ourselves today and what we can do for ourselves. But I'll just really briefly summarize for you what Confucius and Aristotle thought about this, because Confucius really had three virtues that he promoted. And it's not just Confucius, it's all of his followers down through the years, and these are sort of the basic precepts of Confucianism. Is anyone familiar with these? Li, Yi, and Ren? No.
So,
Yeah.
I took Eastern philosophy
Eastern
probably 5 years ago.
Okay. Okay.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, I mean, they're basically, these are the, he wouldn't have called them this necessarily, but they're the basic precepts of Confucianism. And really they are a reflection of his place in time. But Li is ritual propriety. And that's not just religious rituals. It also applies etiquette and sort of the rules of society. In fact, he would have said that it applied man's rules, man-made rules, rituals. Yi is righteousness. He would have called this nature's law. And finally, Ren is, it encapsulates virtuous more broadly, but how do I put this? It's kind of a complicated term because sometimes it's used in certain translations to mean virtuousness in general, but really it means benevolence, so rightness toward others. So there's just three terms that are worth knowing, but the idea was that each of us would individually cultivate these in ourselves. Li, Yi, and Ren, ritual propriety, righteousness, and benevolence. And we'd focus on it daily, whether we're making decisions in our lives or just contemplating. This is what we try to develop. And by developing these things, we became Junsi, was his word. And Junsi, literally translated, means the Lord's Son, or a Lord's Son. And it's basically that we are going to be moral exemplars by developing in ourselves this moral excellence, is the idea. This isn't going to all be moralism, by the way. We are going to move beyond this. Aristotle had a very similar idea. He had a much longer list. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the golden mean in the Nicomachean Ethics. But he highlighted virtues like courage, temperance, generosity, magnificence, self-respect, gentleness, truthfulness, wittiness. It's all there in Book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics if you're interested in pursuing it. But he had a much longer list. Confucius had 3 that we could really focus on. And what's interesting is they both had their sets of virtues, and then they both had their ideal human being, the people who attained this. Junsi, Confucianism, and arete in Greek, which means excellence, basically. We're going to achieve these things. Now, I'd like to bring this beyond moralism and bring it into our shores and into our time through a couple examples. The first person I want to talk about is Benjamin Franklin. How many of you have read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography? Okay. You did? Okay. Anyone else? Wow. Okay. Do you guys know about it? It's one of those things that usually is taught and should be taught in private schools. But did you guys know anything about it? Why do we read Benjamin Franklin's autobiography? Okay. What lessons did you guys get out of it? What was the main reason that we're made to read this book?
Honestly, I couldn't really tell you, but I read it because my professor told me to.
Oh, okay,
but
okay.
I don't remember too much of it. I read it was very self-depreciating.
Okay.
So one of the things I wrote about was about humility and how he was very.
Humility, okay.
But that's about all I got for you.
Okay. Okay, I was hoping more people had read this so I wouldn't have to
Me
keep
too,
preaching
me too.
at you. But
I realized I was the only one with my hand up.
Yeah, yeah.
I
No,
would
no.
have kept it down, but.
Well, what do you guys know about Ben Franklin? He was in Philadelphia, right? And
He's a Renaissance man.
A Renaissance man. What was his condition when he arrived in Philadelphia? Does anyone know this?
Wasn't he apprenticed?
He had been.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll just tell you this, that he basically ran away from his home in Boston. And he showed up in Philadelphia with no money and no status. No one knew him. And by the end of his life, he was not only the richest man in Philadelphia, but he was the leading citizen in civic life, in the sciences, in the philosophical society. He was the leading citizen in Philadelphia, and then of course we all know his role nationally. But so he is sort of held up as this model of someone who is up by the bootstraps.
Was it in his autobiography? Because we also read something else. Was that when he had like all of his rules about how to be like a good American or a good citizen, or was that?
In fact, if you flip over your sheets, that would happen here.
Yep,
We have a whole list of them.
I remember that. I got it.
Well, it's pretty memorable. He had this moral development, this project of moral development, where he talked about what he called it a bold and noble experiment, basically. And it's actually pretty funny. You really should read the book because he is, as you said, self-deprecating and very witty. He's the one founding father that we would all like to hang out with someday if we had the chance. But he said basically that he wished to live in his life without any faults. But he was surprised to find that he was much more full of faults than he ever could have possibly imagined when he went into this project. But the idea was that he developed this set of 13 virtues, and he created a guidebook that he filled out every single day. And each week he would focus on one virtue of cultivating in himself. And when he failed, he put a little black mark in his book, and this is something we have as Benjamin Franklin, not at the Hohenstein Center, but we have as a national treasure of Ben Franklin's journal with all this in it. But he's another great example of someone who very self-consciously developed himself. The other example that I would like to talk about, to bring forward into modern times, is Henry Adams. Has anyone read The Education of Henry Adams? Not so much, okay. Well, you guys have that third quotation there. And I would like to do something a little more than what we've done with the two previous. Do we have some Wikipedia readers here? There's a great term that comes out of Wikipedia, disambiguate. You guys know that term? No? When you type in something that's not quite clear enough and you want to round down your search results a little bit, it asks you to disambiguate. Okay, never mind. But anyway, we're going to move beyond disambiguate. But if I could get a volunteer to read this paragraph, and then what I want to do is break it down by each sentence, because Henry Adams is sort of a dense read, but if we could, again, try to draw some lessons out of this. We have a volunteer. It's a little bit longer than Scott's reading. Christine?
No doubt the world at large will always lag so far behind the active mind as to make a soft cushion of inertia to drop upon, as it did for Henry Adams. But education should try to lessen the obstacles, diminish the friction, invigorate the energy, and should train minds to react, not at haphazard, but by choice, on the lines of force that attract their world. What one knows is, in youth, of little moment. They know enough who know how to learn. Throughout human history, the waste of mind has been appalling. And, as this story is meant to show, society has conspired to promote it. No doubt, the teacher is the worst criminal, but the world stands behind him and drags the student from his course. The moral is stentorian. Only the most energetic, the most highly fitted, and the most favored have overcome the friction or the viscosity of inertia, and these were compelled to waste 3/4 of their energy in doing it.
All right. What do you guys know about Henry Adams? The whole point of his book, his autobiography, it's really worth a read. I don't know if you're familiar with the Modern Library, but they do this ranking of the 100 greatest nonfiction and the 100 greatest fiction books of the 20th century. And Henry Adams has been #1 for a decade now, this particular book. But the reason is his lifetime spanned from before the Civil War through World War I. And he was very active in American life, especially American cultural life, during Theodore Roosevelt's time in office around that time. But imagine the changes that occurred in this nation between the Civil War and World War I. Just try to put yourself, I mean, we've all, even if we haven't done a close study of those two wars, we can sort of imagine what it was like to be there. What was it like on a battlefield in the Civil War? It was dirty, but it was combat, right? It was hand to hand. We had these new weapons that could kill so many more people than we could before. In World War I, imagine yourself in the trenches there. Even stronger killing machines. We're in trenches. It's a totally different kind of warfare. We're wearing camouflage for the first time, which an artist would appreciate, was developed by a French impressionist. But think about the differences. What changed between 1860 and basically the 1910s to 1919? A whole lot. And the message of his whole autobiography is that his education in school, his formal education, did not prepare him for all the change he'd see in his lifetime. And he was constantly having to rethink how he was living and who he was. But if we can go back to this quotation, that first sentence, no doubt the world at large will always lag so far behind the active mind as to make a soft cushion of inertia to drop upon, as it did for Henry Adams. First of all, his book is in the third person, which I always think is a little pretentious. But what does that mean to you guys? Who has an active mind here? Do you feel like there's so much inertia in this world? There's so many things to distract you. What do we all watch on TV when we get home? I don't know about you guys, but I tend to think about reality TV, which all of us watch once in a while. But what does that do to an active mind? I think this is what Henry Adams is getting at. There's so much out there to slow us down. But education should try to lessen the obstacles, diminish the friction, invigorate the energy, and should train minds to react, not at haphazard, but by choice. What are you guys thinking about right now? Everyone looks like they're either giving up or you've got some ideas.
I think it speaks to the lack of challenging pop culture, if it will. I mean, to look critically upon those things around us rather than just accept it. I think that's part of what he's saying.
Be critical.
I think it sounds really hard. Like, I don't remember if it was Nancy or someone I was reading was talking about how when children are born, they want to learn. Like, you can't stop them from learning, but by the time they get to first, second grade, now they hate school, you know, they're bored, you know, depending obviously on the situation, but I think it'd be really difficult to achieve like a level of discipline while not killing their own like desire to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what does it say here about the people that do overcome all the friction and all the inertia? What does it say about them in that very last sentence? They have to waste 3/4 of their energy. You're right, it is a very difficult task. But what is he saying here when he's saying that we're exerting 3/4 of our energy in doing it? Because that didn't happen in his education, his formal education. He wasn't challenged even though he went to Harvard College. How does this relate to what we've been talking about here today?
I think it certainly lacks, the statement itself lacks in humility, which former folks at Confucius and Aristotle subscribe to. And I think basically saying that you say that teachers in society as a whole has felled someone like him who seeks greater levels of knowledge. I think it's pretty, it's a strong condemnation of society as a whole intellectually and obviously the educational system that he went through.
Right, which was much different than the one we have today. But if the moral of his book is that he wasn't prepared for all the changes that went through, he was a pretty highly educated guy. What is the moral about formal education in general? What's the lesson? And I'm not trying to bash schools. That's not my. I'm not saying schools are bad. That's not the lesson. But what is the lesson?
Once upon a time, we always looked at a bachelor's as proof that you've learned how to teach yourself. I'm not sure that's really viewed as such anymore. But I would certainly say when you talk to my parents and others in the baby boom generation, that is how they viewed higher education. It's proof that you know how to learn, so you have become a lifelong learner by getting a bachelor's. And I think what he was getting at here in part was just the idea that you have to know how to teach yourself because the world is going to change.
So what you're saying is it's flawed to go into an undergraduate education expecting you to get a credential and that's it. That's supposed to mean something more. And and that
I
relating.
think we've changed our views, and it's interesting because I think a lot of it comes from the corporate world changing their priorities. The corporate world used to want people with a bachelor's understanding that they knew how to learn, and then would train them into something fairly specific. And in most fields, that seems to have gone away. And more so, corporate training has diminished dramatically, and that is one of the reasons we have such an increase in the requirements for master's programs. And quite a while ago, Peter Drucker, I think, was the one that said that just to keep your job, you're going to need the equivalent of 3 graduate credits a year in training outside of whatever you're getting at work, just to keep up and keep your job, because your boss, your corporation is no longer going to offer that. And the only field in which I see that still happening is CPAs. And even that, I'm not sure how much longer that will continue. But right now, you know, a degree in accounting is a fairly general thing. And you get hired in by one of the big CPA firms, and they train you to actually be a CPA. But I don't see that in very many other fields anymore.
Well, I want to pull out something you said in your original statement that I think is very much relevant to Henry Adams, to Ben Franklin, to Confucius, to Aristotle, and that was teach yourself, learn to learn. Those are 2 things you said, and I think that really is his message here, is not that we need to make our educational institutions perfect, because they never will be. You know, teachers do their best. Scott, we've got a teacher, we're doing our best. My dad is state superintendent, they're doing their best. But what he's trying to impart is this idea that we have to develop our own intellect. So we've talked about moral excellence. We've talked about intellectual excellence. And these are 2 things that we're called upon to develop in ourselves, to go above and beyond sort of the details of the classroom. And Henry Adams and Benjamin Franklin are the 2 American examples of this, developing one's own virtues and developing one's own intellectual capacity. And so those are 2 lessons that I want to get across to you guys today, just two ideas to get across. Because I think every freshman coming into a university should have that challenge. In my undergraduate education, plenty of my friends were there to get a credential. And I saw it. And I even had a friend actually who he was a business student, not that I grade business students, but he was not someone who was interested in writing papers. And so he would wait till a half hour before it was due, and he would run down into the basement where his bedroom was and type something up, and it was total junk, and he would bring it back to me to correct for him. But the point was, he wasn't taking his education seriously. And a message that I think all freshmen should hear is that this education is yours. You're going to get a lot in the classroom, but there's a lot more to get through your own intellectual pursuit, through your own self-pursuit. But these are ancient lessons. Moral development, intellectual development, this do-it-yourself mentality. And I have a couple exercises I'd like to do when we come back from a break. So if you guys want to meet back here at 5 after, we have a couple more practical insights, because so far we've been talking about moral and intellectual excellence, but I want to talk a little bit about professionalism now. So I'll give you all an opportunity to get some water and recharge. Thank you. All right, well, it looks like we're all back. I'd like to conclude with just one exercise. Now that we've talked about moral excellence and intellectual excellence and pursuing those things on our own, and I've moralized at you for the better part of an hour. I'd like to focus on our professional excellence and how we continue to develop ourselves as professionals, because we know that followers, or people, like to follow people that they respect and admire, and that's part of the moral and intellectual excellence. But you also have to be pretty good at what you do, right? If you're morally and intellectually, you know, a he-man or a she-woman, and you can't do your job, you're still going to be in trouble. So anyway, what I'd like to do is get a volunteer, of someone who has a job right now that they don't necessarily plan on staying in. So I'm saying that because I could get Scott in trouble if I did this exercise. But somebody, Kate?
I work at the body jewelry kiosk in the mall.
Body jewelry? I remember that
For
picture.
sure, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay.
Got a job in
Body jewelry kiosk.
Oh, yeah.
Like sales.
Sounds pretty interesting.
It's a retail mobile unit.
The retail
Oh. Retail.
Not like a college kiosk, you're saying it's a retail mall.
Wow.
We're anchored to the ground, so it's not really mobile.
Do you have like talking points?
Huh?
They give you talking points, specific terms you're supposed to use. Retail movie.
Welcome to the R&D.
Okay, well, Kate, what I want to ask you is what skills are required in your job?
Customer service skills, like being able to talk to people.
What else?
Kind of going along with that sales. Just that's a little bit different than customer service and communication.
Sales?
Yeah.
So is that it's convincing people?
Yeah, convincing.
Manipulating?
Conniving. Marketing, there you go.
What else?
Knowledge, like you have a base of knowledge about
Knowledge about jewelry? Okay. Anything else?
That's about all I got.
That's about it? Okay. Is there another job to focus on?
Waitressing?
Waitressing, okay. Sorry, my handwriting's terrible. Can you even read that?
No.
Usually you can read the first 3 letters I write. Disintegrates. Okay, what are some skills?
Customer service, upselling. So convincing people they want more than they actually do.
Some pushing product.
Yeah.
I've never eaten either.
That comes along with the alcohol, probably.
Trying to tell people food's good there.
So know your product again, so
Yes. You have to get along with your coworkers.
People skills.
Mm-hmm.
That's the universal.
And be nice to the cooks. That's very important. Don't do it. I get my food out a lot faster than some of the other waitresses there.
Yeah?
They're not nice.
It's a popularity contest. Okay. Anything else?
You have to learn how to do the computer and counting skills, obviously.
All right. Now, Kate, if you keep improving all these skills, what happens? If you keep developing in yourself better and better.
To manager of the retail.
You become manager. Maybe, maybe.
Possibly.
But what happens
But you
first?
Get better,
Why then?
you get better sales or you get better results.
Better results. So you become a better body jewelry salesman. I don't even know why I read on the board. I mean, what's the point? I read something that no one can read anyway. Kaylee, how about you? What happens if you keep improving in these?
I get better tips.
You guys have better answers than me. But what happens to you?
Really? I'm friendlier? Nothing?
Do you become a better waitress?
Yeah.
If you keep working on improving these areas?
More virtuous.
More virtuous.
Not really. I learned how to convince people, which I don't really like.
Okay, and if you do that for a decade, what's going to happen? You're going to keep becoming a better and better jewelry salesman and a better and better waitress.
A little crazy.
That's not what you want to do?
No. You get bored.
And
Okay.
it's stir crazy.
Okay.
Being by the carousel all day long, I could do it for years.
Okay. Well, what I would like to suggest to you is that you picture what you want to do in the future, whether that's still in salesmanship or management, or if it's in restaurant management. No?
Not at all.
Well, what I'd like to suggest is you start thinking through that next step, your ideal job, and think through those skill sets. So what's an example? Who's someone who's an aspiring professional who knows what they want to do next? I'm not going to write these on the board. So
Yeah. Eventually you want to have a graphic design company, be self-employed.
And what new skills will you need to have to do that?
Lots of web knowledge, still trying to get. And I think the comfort was trying to sell yourself, like cold calling, going in, trying to drum up business, like all the business aspect of it.
Okay. So the business side of it.
Uh-huh.
Who else? Do we have other aspiring professionals here?
I want to be an event planner, so I really do need customer
You want to be a what?
service. An event planner.
An event planner. Well, that's a good thing to say when you're sitting next to Mandy.
Yeah.
And what will that require? Maybe
Customer
Mandy,
service.
Customer service. What else? That,
Skills.
that you're not doing now?
Booking flights, attention to detail,
Attention to detail.
Management.
Okay.
Definitely.
multiple events going at once, anticipating the need before it occurs.
Well, what I want to suggest is there's an opportunity in any job to focus on what you want to do next and work on developing some of those skills too. So you're not just improving more and more. You want to be the best jewelry saleswoman you can be and the best waitress you can be. But there's also an opportunity to stretch yourself. And that's the lesson I want to impart about professional excellence. It's not just developing better who you are now, but developing into the person you want to be. And so, does that ring true with anybody? Is anyone doing a self-project right now, trying to develop themselves?
That's why I'm here today, quite honestly. I mean, I'm in a position, I think, career-wise, where I'm very comfortable and very much enjoying what I'm doing. Don't know that there's a next step necessarily, but I mean, I just think that things like this are opportunities for personal.
Yeah. It is sort of funny. The way I have this laid out is we're going to talk about self, team, and system. And by definition, the people that are showing up to this workshop are probably a little more focused on developing themselves. So this first one might be preaching to the choir. But that's good. Well, the last thing I would like to do then is just to ask you, what are some of the skill sets that a leader needs? Talking about becoming leaders in the future. And we won't write on the board.
Excellent communication systems, because you have to be able to not only encourage people to follow you, but you also have to be able to express your vision, what it is you want them to follow.
Right. It's communication.
You have to be able to develop your vision.
Develop your vision. So have a vision. Style.
I think being a good listener is critical.
Good listener. So not only communicating. Listening and developing those ideas. Well, I won't harp on this too long, but I just wanted to impart the idea that we can constantly focus on our own skill sets and developing those skill sets. So beyond the moral excellence, beyond the intellectual excellence in this constant project, a strenuous life is the lesson that Theodore Roosevelt gave us. We can also focus on developing ourselves as professionals, and you all are doing that already here. But that's the message I want to leave you with. So if there's nothing else, are there any questions people would like to ask?
I just had one. I'm reading a book right now. It's called The Outliers. And it talks
Gladwell.
about, I'm sorry?
Malcolm Gladwell?
Yes. It talks about needing 10,000 hours of a skill to do something well. And it lists out several examples, but there's an additional component in that. And one of the examples I give is taking a look at hockey players, and there's examples from business and everything else in there too about being in the right place at the right time. In essence, the example they give in terms of hockey is that already when children are small, there's certain cutoff dates for their birthdays, and so usually when a child starts playing a sport, they're young, second, third grade, and the cutoff date for hockey is January 1st, and so the size of children at that age are vary quite a bit, and so if your birthday is say January 2, you in essence are one of the oldest children in your grade, therefore you're also bigger and stronger, and if you are in that bigger and stronger set, then you're perceived as having higher skills and being better at the sport. And so then all the way through, you not only get put in the higher skill set, you get better training because you're better at playing hockey, so you're perceived to have higher skills. And then that follows all the way through as you go through high school and you get into your professional career. But it's not necessarily because you have better skills, it's just that your birthday was at the opportune time. And they have, a lot of examples of, the professionals where their birthdays really are in January and February because they did get better training because they got put in that higher skill set younger. And so it's just something interesting to think about, all of these folks did put in, the magic number was 10,000 hours, but yet they were in the right place, they were born in the right month, the right time.
Yeah.
And so I think there are some theories out there too that hard work isn't always.
It's not always enough.
Right.
Yeah, no, there's definitely, for all the leadership fellows in the room, I had my dad come and address the group last month. He's the state superintendent here. And when we asked him for leadership lessons, what's the most important element of leadership, and he said luck. And so the idea is that you prepare yourself to be a leader, but you need some breaks. So you can do all these things and then need some breaks. But yet you still need to do all these things in order to take advantage of the breaks when they come. This is the concept.
That requires patience.
Patience, another leadership. Yeah, there you go. What I'd like to, I'll leave you with just one more thing because I left it out earlier. I'm going to leave you with a conceptual framework, which is probably the worst thing to leave somebody with, but I don't want to leave it out, so I'm going to do it real fast. I'm just going to draw it on the board and let you guys go. But this is the social cognitive model of leadership. Writing competence, and I couldn't remember if it was a C or an S. Talk about competence.
Okay, we can read it anyway.
There you go. There you go. Arrows everywhere. Let's see if I can put the most complex thing right at the end. All right, there we go. If you can make any sense of it. This is the social cognitive theory of leadership, and it is an empowering theory, and it goes along with the proactivity that we were talking about earlier. As leaders, our behavior is dependent on our competence. KSAs is usually what's used. It's knowledge, skills, and abilities, which affects our confidence, which affects our goals. Those confident leaders are the ones that can set high goals. Now those who have the confidence, and the high goals, and also have the motivation and strategy in place, behave a certain way. And when they behave, the environment responds. And what is that? That's a new experience. So it comes all the way back. So experience influences our confidence, and our goals. Filtered through our motivation and our strategy, because you can have great goals, a whole lot of confidence, and be a slug. And your behavior is going to be different. Behavior, environment, all the way back. So a complex way of saying, basically what we've been saying all day, which is that we can focus on our competence. We can try to give ourselves new experiences, and in this way, continually improve our behavior. Complex and useful mostly for people writing journal articles. but I'll leave you with that anyway. Thank you all for being here. We'll hope to see you on February 2nd. We're going to focus on team leadership and being part of a team. And then in the final workshop, we're going to focus on leading a larger system. And that's going to be Gleaves teaching that one. Self-team system. Very word. Starts in the arrows. That's okay. Thank you, guys.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Grand Valley State University. Visit us at gvsu.edu.